Hi, I'm Stuart, and this is my presentation for the Abram Animism and the Alphabet essay. So, kind of what I did in my first paragraph, I talked about how David Abram brings up the idea between oral and literate culture, and how we were completely oral until we switched, or until we learned the alphabet, or until the alphabet became more widely recognized, and then we switched into a literate culture, I guess. But while it seems black and white at first, there can still exist traces of oral culture in our society today. We see it in countries, certain activities, cultures, and even in people. You can tell whether someone's more oral or literate. And compared to our today's society, I find myself on the oral side of the spectrum. So I guess I'm answering the first prompt, and do you find yourself more oral or literate? I find myself more oral. So then my first paragraph, I kind of just go into talking about what is encompassed in oral culture as opposed to literature. I have this big quote from his essay on page 47, where he says, like all stories of the distant time or dream time, Socrates' myth of the cicadas is a functional myth. It serves to explain certain observed characteristics of the cicadas, like their endless humming and buzzing and their apparent lack of any need for nourishment. When music appeared, some of the people of those days were so thrilled with pleasure that they went on singing and quite forgot to eat and drink. Anthropologists have tended to view such stories from the dream time or distant time as confused attempts at casual explanation by the primitive mind. Here, however, in the light of our discussion regarding orality and literacy, such stories can be seen to serve a far more practical function. So these myths and stories both demonstrate an appreciation and tendency to be involved with the natural world, as well as make us use of stories for easier memory. So people, when trying to explain the things around them or trying to explain the phenomena that they were seeing, like that I think they were talking about how cicadas hummed, and then they were talking about how I think the codfish, why its liver was oily, and things like that. So when people are trying to explain them, they use stories, and since they couldn't write them down, to pass them on to each other, to ask people, hey, why does the cod have an oily liver or whatever? And so it was a lot easier than just saying it just does. As opposed to just knowing these things offhand, it was a lot easier for people to come up with stories and songs and things to explain all this. So that's kind of this essay is just talking about. That's kind of what the oral aspects of. It's like when we didn't have an alphabet or a way to communicate through texts to future generations or to other people, what was happening, we would use these easy to remember stories. And so that's kind of how, that's why rhyming and rhythm in songs made it so easy. That's why stories where you personified the characters, like the fish. Like if a guy marries a fish, it comes into this story. So if you're telling a story about it, it's a lot easier to remember. So then I explain how, we can still use those oral aspects in today's society. So we still experience nature. Abram has this very long essay, Tongues and Trees, I think it's called, not essay, a paragraph, which kind of goes over the very natural aspect of that. And he talks about the shamans who learn directly from the earth, and how people in maybe less developed countries still are very reliant on their natural surrounding world around them. So then I kind of talk. So obviously we still have that today, and that can come in various forms too. Maybe we aren't going to go on walkabout or become a shaman, but we can still take a drive through the mountains and appreciate the the nature around us, or raft down a river. There's a lot of ways that we experience nature, and we feel the power of the nature that we're in, and we see that in artistically as well. We can see that in, so we can see this artistically. The way a lot of landscape art is, talks about big, huge unman-made scenes. Beardstadt did a lot of paintings in Yellowstone National Park in the 1800s, which gained a lot of attention in the East Coast. So we still have this connection to nature, obviously. And we see that in our art, and we can still experience nature today. And also, we're not constantly relying on the texts of others. For everything we say, we're not using other texts. We still have that memory. We still are using personal experience and stories and rhyming and things to make it easier for us to memorize these things. So not everything is coming through just textual messaging, like whether that be text or emails or whatever it is today. That's not the only way we're communicating. We're obviously still talking to people orally. So then that leads to this spectrum in our culture today of, and you can see that in anybody, in countries and cultures. You can see the spectrum of all the people on whether or not they're more literate and they view towards the more literate aspects of our society, or oral, and they find themselves taking place in more of the oral settings. So then I make the claim that I am more on the oral side of that. I do spend a lot of time in the outdoors in nature. I love to ski, run, mountain bike, trail running. I've surfed. Like, all of these things are very intimate with nature, I guess. Like, to ski, you need to have the mountain to be able to ski. You need to have the snow there. For biking, you need to have the trails where you can bike. Trails laid out by people before you, by the way. So that's also an oral passing down of where good trails are. Running and surfing is another example. You need the ocean to be there. Like, you need to have that. It's a connection. It's a agreement almost between you and the ocean. Like, you both need to work together to make that one thing happen. And so then that leads me to the conclusion. That's kind of the last paragraph that I talked about in the conclusion of my essay. As my conclusion paragraph, in Abrams' essay, he brought up the shift from oral culture to literate culture. While I agree that there has been a shift culturally, we can still find many aspects of oral culture in today's literate society. I find that among my counterparts, I partake in a relatively high number of these oral aspects. While those same aspects may be dwindling in popularity, I don't believe they will ever truly go extinct due to their complete usage of the human senses. And there was another part earlier that kind of went along with the synesthesia aspect in that last portion of the essay that Abram had in there about the synesthesia. And so I think that I'm more oral because I am more encompassed by those synesthetic activities, ones that use up more than one sense, not just writing out an email or seeing an email, texting, that stuff. I really like to be able to use all my senses, seeing, hearing, feeling, like whatever it is. I think it makes sure that I'm more engrossed, and so I find those activities more fun. So that's my essay. Thanks.